Do you find memorizing music easy when you're not trying to, and then almost impossible when you're attempting to do it consciously? If you answered yes, you're definitely not alone. In today's episode of the Coffee Break Harp, I will tell you what to do when that happens and how you can work on memorizing your pieces so you can perform them with confidence. Before we start, let's talk about why is it that some of your music seems to make its way to your head seemingly without any effort on your side, while there are other sections that you just can't remember no matter how hard you try. Perhaps you've already noticed that you're rather likely to play the beginning of your pieces from memory, and this has a lot to do with the number of times we practice and repeat a certain section. For most of us, starting our practice right from the beginning of the piece is what feels most natural, and while there is nothing wrong with doing this from time to time, if this is the way that you start your practice sessions on most of the days, in the long run it will mean that perhaps you won't always manage to practice all the other sections of your piece, usually those closer towards the end. Then the other thing is that when you do, you're less likely to repeat them as many times as you did for the beginning of a piece. And finally, the third reason behind why these other places may be more tricky is that at the beginning of your practice, your mind is usually in its most alert and active state, and focusing on music and memorizing it will be easier. Even if you don't practice for hours at a time, your focus level is simply not the same at the start of your practice and then 30 minutes in, which is why taking frequent breaks is important. So if you want to work on memorizing sections of your pieces that feel somewhat reluctant, try this. Bring them right to the beginning of your practice sessions, start from there and see how different does it feel. I promise it will. The other reason why some sections of your pieces just get into your head with seemingly no effort is that in these moments you're using your short-term memory, also known as working memory. And this kind of memory relies on two things: the acoustic cues, so the fact that you know the melody of the piece well, and also on the muscle memory, which is your fingers being able to replicate the movements after repeating them several times. Because this kind of memory relies very much on continuity of each finger following the other smoothly and the melody flowing without breaking, it means that if for any reason this flow stops, jumping back can be really hard. This is why it is really important to back it up with other ways of memorizing, so you can not only move what you remember from the short to long-term memory, but you can also jump back easily into playing whenever you need to stop. In order to transfer what you've learned from the short to long-term memory, you need to make the content that you're memorizing, the notes, meaningful to you. This means that in addition to what your fingers are already doing, which right now seems to be working pretty much on autopilot, you need to add a layer of understanding what they're doing. This is where being able to find and recognize patterns in your music can be incredibly helpful. The simplest, smallest patterns are very basic, for example, repeated notes or groups of notes. Another pattern is a pattern of steps, going up or down. When you can explain to your fingers what they're doing, you will no longer have to rely only on them executing the moves correctly. If they play correctly the first group, but you suddenly get distracted and your flow is broken, you can remind your fingers that after the first group you're going to come back to the same string, the D, and repeat that note one more time. And that after that you're going to move one step up, to E. One of the great things about being able to recognize patterns is that you can start working with them long before you even start thinking about memorizing your pieces. And the best part is that they not only make it possible for you to play from memory, but they also help you so much when you're learning to play your pieces from the moment you start. There are a lot of different patterns that you can use to learn and perform more confidently, and I'm covering some of the basic ones in my online course. If that's something you'd like to learn more about, you'll find a link in the description of this video. If you practice looking into your music in a mindful way, you will soon start noticing how patterns are present almost everywhere. When you know your basic patterns, you will soon start spotting more and more of them. But even if you're not sure what they are, you can still use your curiosity to find ways to make what you see meaningful to you. For example, even if you didn't know that this pattern of notes C, E, G is called a C major chord, you can still explain to your fingers that they are all moving up and simply skipping a string on their way, or in other words, that you will have a string of a gap between the fingers. You can use the colors to help. For example, if the part of your left hand goes C, E, G, F, A, C, you can tell your left hand third finger that it starts the first group on the colored string, the C, and that after that it moves down to the other colored string, the F. And in addition to that, you repeat exactly what we said before, that both times we are skipping a string in between each finger. Have you noticed what we've done here and how we already have two layers of patterns? First, the basic pattern of skipping the strings between the fingers, which applies to both groups, and then we added an additional cue which helps our fingers find their way based on the colors of the strings. Do you remember what we said earlier about short-term memory relying mostly on acoustic cues and muscle memory? When you memorize music seemingly without trying, these two senses, hearing and feeling, are the ones that short-term memory relies on. And this is why adding visual cues can help you strengthen what you already remember. Earlier we talked about noticing the colors of the strings and the patterns in relation to that, but these are not the only visual cues that are out there. You can also help yourself by looking at your fingers on the strings and trying to remember what they look like. For example, how many strings can you see between the fingers? Try to imagine seeing this away from the harp without needing to place your fingers on the strings. If you can't do this, it means you have already memorized these notes. Another method is trying to remember the way your score looks like. It can be very helpful to look at your score away from the harp and follow the notes while imagining what the melody sounds like. This, in fact, is one of the strategies for mental practice, which are all extremely helpful if you want to play your pieces from memory and perform with confidence. I have made a whole other episode on mental practice, so if you want to get to know more of these strategies, make sure you check it out. I'll put a link for you in the description. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you experienced memorizing pieces when you were not trying to, or not being able to keep the music in your memory despite the effort? If so, which of these tips will you try first to back your memory up? Let me know in the comments and make sure to subscribe to get notified about future videos. I will be looking forward to hearing from you and to seeing you here for another episode of the Coffee Break Harp. Take care for now. Bye!